Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are taking a wild journey. We're starting on a casual internet forum, but trust me, we are spiraling deep into the trenches of contemporary philosophy and film theory. We're going to unpack what it actually means to be a subject, and how those movies we watch all the time, they're actually mirroring massive, fierce academic battles over the very nature of reality. Let's get into it.
So, take a look at this. It's a totally everyday question posed on Reddit. Any other thinkers you like reading besides Zizek but similar to him? The user here was just looking for someone who uses sophisticated philosophy, dives into political analysis, and, isn't afraid of a little controversy or an obscene joke. But this casual query, it is literally the perfect entry point for us. It sets the stage for a world of complex, hot-take philosophy where the stakes are surprisingly high.
So here's our roadmap. First, we're searching for Slavoj Žižek. Then, we'll get into the battle for the subject. Look at spectators in the cinema, define the radical rupture, and finally, face off with the event versus the act.
All right, part 1, searching for Slavoj Žižek, and going from casual queries straight down academic rabbit holes.
Right, so a Reddit user named, All-Two-Finger Elden Lord replied with a really great recommendation. They said someone directly in Zizek's circle is Todd McGowan, pointing out his scholarship in Hegelianism and Lacanianism. And what's just amazing to me here is how this one simple, quick internet recommendation is a direct bridge. Just by exploring Todd McGowan's work, boom, we are suddenly thrust right into the middle of high-stakes academic battles that these exact thinkers are fighting out in journals and lecture halls today.
Which brings us to part 2, the battle for the subject. Dialectics going head-to-head with object-oriented ontology.
Now, the absolute crucial point here is this deep, deep divide over who or what is actually at the center of the universe. On one side, we have object-oriented ontology, or OOO for short. OO wants to completely deprivilege the human. They want to dissolve the human subject to focus on a flat world of objects, often to get us to focus more on things like ecological crises. But on the flip side, we have dialectics, championed by the Zizek circle. And they actively affirm the human subject, not as some grand master of the universe, mind you, but as a necessary failure, a sort of rupture in ideology. It is a fundamental, massive split in how we view existence itself.
Let's unpack that OO side a bit more and strip away the jargon. What is a flat ontology? Basically, it's an approach that knocks the Enlightenment human subject right off its pedestal. Thinkers like Graham Harman and Quentin Melisu argue for this flattened-out universe. They're essentially saying that treating human agency as the absolute center of everything, it's just arrogant. To them, we are ultimately no more exceptional than a rock, a camera, or a tree. They want us to look at how objects relate to other objects, completely independent of us humans observing them.
And a huge target for these OO thinkers is something called correlationism. That's the idea that we only ever have access to the correlation between thinking and being. Thinkers like Melisu argue that if we only focus on the human mind and how we perceive things, it blinds us to actual, material, pre-human reality, what he calls the ancestral world. To them, insisting that a human subject absolutely has to be there to validate reality, they think that's a total delusion.
Moving right along to part 3, spectators in the cinema. This is where we see how film theory perfectly mirrors these massive philosophical wars.
Okay, so looking at Lawrence Shervington's paper, Like Spectator, Like Subject, really proves that these debates aren't just abstract, head-in-the-clouds musings. No, they are playing out right now in rigorous academic journals, synthesizing decades of film theory just to make sense of our current philosophical divides. The paper traces how the fight over the subject has literally repeated itself in the realm of cinema. It turns out the movie theater is actually the perfect laboratory for testing out these wild ideas.
Let's rewind a bit. Back in the 1970s, Lacanian film theorists like Christian Metz and Jean-Louis Baudry took a really critical view of the spectator. That's you and me sitting in the dark watching a film. They identify what they called cinematic idealism. This is the illusion where the cinema spectator actually feels like a transcendental subject, almost like a god. Because the camera can move absolutely anywhere and show us anything in continuous time, the cinema tricks us into this false sense of total mastery. In their view, the spectator is basically a dupe, just blindly accepting this massive ideological illusion. But then, we see a radical shift in the academic literature. Later dialectical thinkers, like Joan Kopchak and Todd McGowan, who remember is the exact thinker our Reddit user recommended earlier, they come in and completely flip the script on earlier film theory.
Instead of seeing the spectator as just some passive dupe being endlessly tricked by a flat world of cinematic objects, they push back. They reclaim the absolute importance of the subject.
You see, for these dialectical thinkers, the spectator is not a master at all. We are a rupture within ideology. For McGowan, when we look up at the cinematic screen, it isn't some grand illusion of control. Instead, the cinematic gaze is an encounter with what psychoanalysis calls the real. The spectator actually emerges at the exact point where the representation fails or distorts. We are not gods sitting there watching a movie. We are literally a glitch in the system.
All right, Section 4. Defining the radical rupture and breaking the continuity of history. Now, thinkers in this dialectical camp, like Slavoj Žižek and Alain Badiou, they actually share a very specific definition of what this rupture is, and it's intense. First off, they completely reject the idea of gradual, slow social progress. For them, true political change is a complete, undeniable break in history. They also view this break as inherently violent. That might mean a psychic violence, like totally uprooting your entire worldview, or actual physical violence. And lastly, this rupture defies mere historical context, meaning you can't just explain it away by looking at the economic conditions of the time. It breaks the mold entirely.
And crucially, this real stands absolutely irreducible to any social construction. This is a vital piece of their shared philosophy. A true rupture, a genuine moment of real change, it cannot simply be reduced to the historical situation it popped out of. It is something entirely radically new that pierces right through our constructed reality. It's a moment of pure truth that you just cannot socially construct away.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, the event versus the act, and the internal divide in dialectical thought.
Now, when you dig into academic collections like subject lessons, you really see how these dense theoretical ecosystems get mapped out. And here is where things get really spicy. Both Žižek and Badiou absolutely agree that a radical rupture is necessary to break us out of historical continuity. But the academic battle rages on because they vehemently, fundamentally disagree on the source and the nature of that rupture.
Their opposing views are just incredibly stark here. Let's break it down. For Alain Badiou, this rupture is called the event. It's entirely based on affirmation and fidelity, and he leans really heavily on Karl Marx, leaving Hegel at the door. For Badiou, you achieve subjectivity by embracing a collectivity, by coming together. But then you have Slavoj Žižek. He calls the rupture the act, and his core concept is completely different. It's based on negativity and loss, and he uses Hegel to critique Marx. For Žižek, subjectivity isn't about joining a happy collective, it is about enduring absolute, total devastation.
To really wrap our heads around Žižek's side of things, we actually have to look to Hegel, who said, "Spirit is this power only by looking the negative in the face and tarrying with it." Žižek argues that human subjectivity, the actual ability to perform a true political act, is born precisely from this. It's born from surviving total devastation, from completely losing your ground in being, and looking that pure, raw negativity right in the face without blinking.
And, obviously, that is a massive contrast to Badiou. For him, human agency does not come from enduring devastation, it comes from fidelity to the event. It comes from remaining fiercely, stubbornly loyal to a truth that suddenly breaks from the past. So, when an event happens, whether that's in politics, science, art, or even love, the true subject is the person who commits to that new truth and affirms it, no matter what happens.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today. We went from simple Reddit queries right into massive ontology wars and cinematic theory. We uncovered those huge academic battles over flat ontology. We took a dive into the darkened rooms of psychoanalytic film theory. And we finally unpacked that fierce dialectical debate over how human beings can actually enact radical political change. Which leaves us with one final, pretty profound question. Are you just another object in a flat ontology, literally no different than a camera or a rock? Or are you a radical rupture, a glitch in the system, completely capable of a true history-breaking act? It is definitely a lot to think about the next time you sit down in a movie theater or, endlessly scroll through an internet forum. Keep questioning everything, and thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.